Tyler MacMillan of Tall Timbers. Tyler, come on up here. Okay, you're right here. Come on over. And the title of Tyler's talk is offense. Oh, offense and defense.
Again.
Okay, again. Go Gators, go Noles. Anyway, conservation easements in the Big Bend.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm glad everybody made it back. Although, as you noticed, none of the people from Tall Timbers are here anymore because I guess they think they've seen this before. And if you also notice, those people were very scientific. I've actually got a background in environmental planning and resource management from the Urban and Regional Planning Department at FSU, and that's in the social sciences. So I don't do that hard science thing, so maybe this will be a little more understandable to some of us who aren't on the science realm there. I have found, though, in doing this type of work for about 36 years, that it's important sometimes to have somebody in between the scientists and the people who need to understand what's going on. We're kind of translators sometimes to take the science either to the politicians or to the people who need to know it, and that's part of my job now. It's a really enjoyable thing. So starting out, there probably everybody in here knows something about Tall Timbers. Yeah. I'm going to do a little bit of intro to Tall Timbers. I think most people know what it is, but I just got to touch on a few things. So we've been a research station since 1958, and that's a long time ago. That's 5 years older than me, and I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about how the research station got founded, but we do a lot of wildlife research, a whole lot of stuff with prescribed burning, and then we are also a land trust since 1991. I'm going to weave about 3 different things together into this presentation, the conservation side with conservation easements, and then a new statewide program, or newish, and then also our land management programs. So we do a lot of work with private landowners. We probably work more with private landowners than anybody else, although we have involvement with public lands as well. So the area we work in, at least when they started this land trust, was what's called the Red Hills, and this cool Google Earth image really gives you a interesting viewpoint of what's going on around us here. So we've got Tallahassee over here, Monticello, and Thomasville, and basically that whole area in between is the Red Hills, and you can see that signature of forested landscape there. Savannas, pine savannas, is way different than what's around with all the active agriculture, center pivots, etc. in North Georgia, and even a good bit of pasture land and agriculture south of the Red Hills. So the Red Hills are obviously known for the red clay soils, which are very rich. They grow vegetation very well, and I think a lot of us spend a lot of our time trying to figure out ways to manage that vegetation. The Red Hills tradition has been going on for 100+ years. Quail hunting, prescribed fire, habitat conservation. It's the tradition of these properties and this quail thing is rich in many different ways. But one is economic impact, and we have a new study that just came out. There's copies of this down on the table in the lobby about the economic impact. So the economic impact of these types of properties in this region is about $231.7 million a year. 1,386 jobs pretty much directly supported through these properties. And for Jefferson County, it's about a $32 million economic impact just in Jefferson County. And Dr. Julie Harrington was here yesterday. Is she here today? No. And I was chatting with her about the study, and she actually said she felt those numbers were pretty conservative. She thinks it's quite a bit higher. She was very integral in crunching the data on that study. So Tall Timbers background, the property itself is located on Highway 12 north of Tallahassee, right on the Georgia line pretty much. It's about almost 4,000 acres historic hunting property. It's in Leon County with a little tiny bit of it up in Grady County, Georgia. And we are the home of prescribed fire research. It really started here, and it started here with this guy, Henry Beadle, who owned the property. Back in starting around the turn of the century, and a little after that, this area started to be, the large properties started to be snatched up by northern industrialists, folks who had a lot of money. And they would come down and buy these large hunting plantations as winter retreats, and also to enjoy the wonderful sport of quail hunting and working bird dogs and all that. Well, after a few years, the quail numbers really crashed quite a bit in the area, and so they decided they needed to figure that out and hired this guy, Herbert Stoddard, here, pictured here, and who went on to do a lot of research in quail. Really interesting guy. We have somebody who does a whole presentation on Herbert Stoddard. He had an 8th grade education, but he was a very keen observer of natural processes and natural science, if you will, and basically did these groundbreaking studies on quail. And so after looking at the situation for a little while, there's a lot of stuff about quail, but the answer is fire. It's like, if you stop burning the land, which is what they did after the Northerners moved down here and didn't really know how to manage the land, they stopped burning the land. A lot of it was old agricultural land, and so it hadn't really needed burning right away. But, this landscape has been burning forever, like Dr. Varner talked about yesterday, on almost a 2-year interval. And when you cut that off, bad things happen pretty quickly around here. And so that was why the quail were disappearing. So they said we should do more burning. And about the time, as he also mentioned, about the time we were saying you should be doing more burning, the feds were saying we should not be lighting the woods on fire, because they had this new friend of theirs, Smokey the Bear, and the circuit riders that Morgan talked about, who were trying to get on this wildfire kick. And so we butted heads with the federal government for quite a while, and part of the reason they formed this organization was so we never had to be influenced by the federal government anymore in doing our scientific work. We had done a bunch of scientific work. We'd figured out it was fire. They didn't like that. They told us no, and so we said, well, we're going to have this private research station, and we'll never have to worry about the federal government again. The irony of that is we're probably about 95% federally funded right now with our grants and stuff, but they have changed their tune a little bit. So basically, fire is the answer, and that got us going on fire. So the mission's an important thing to think about here. The mission is to foster exemplary land stewardship through research, conservation, and education. And the important thing to me, one of the really important things, is that you need to draw an arrow from research to conservation to education. The research drives the conservation and the education. As you heard just a little while ago, Jenny talking about how we're able to look at these landscapes using high-tech means now and really prioritize the areas that need to be protected, that we need to be targeting for conservation. There's a lot of that type of work going on, not only in the fire field and the bird field. We do a lot of bird research, obviously, and but also in our geomatics that Jenny's involved with, just trying to figure out how to get more targeted with a lot of our conservation. Once again, just repeating at the top here, Tall Timbers is a property that is in Leon and Grady counties. Livingston Place is another property that was gifted to Tall Timbers, I want to say about 15 years ago or so, in northern Jefferson County. That's about 9,125 acres. And we do a lot of research there as well, focus on wildlife, wetlands, agriculture, and forestry. And that, interestingly, is protected with a conservation easement to the Suwannee River Water Management District. So not only are we people who hold conservation easements that others have, but we have a property that has a conservation easement held by somebody else. Both properties are in the Red Hills region. Tall Timbers over here on the left, and Livingston Place. At Livingston Place, we went through a lot of work restoring the main house. The property is on the National Register of Historic Places. It's the home of the Continental Field Trials, a bird dog trial that's held every year. It's pretty big in that sport if you're into it. And the main house there has been restored completely, and it is now available for meetings, weddings, things like that. It's a really neat property if you get a chance to visit there. So looking at this, we do our best to make some very busy looking maps. And if you've looked at the ones in the lobby, this is one that's very similar. It's kind of hard to see some of the detail on here, but these greenish colored properties are protected by tall timbers conservation easements. Some of the other colors are protected by other entities conservation easements. And then we have a new thing we call, with the stripes on it, may not be too visible from there, but that we call tall timbers facilitated easements. That's where we have helped a property owner through another process, maybe usually with a state agency. In these instances, it's mostly Florida Forever, but also sometimes the Rural and Family Lands program that the Department of Agriculture has here in Florida. We've helped that property owner into an easement through there, and it's not one that we own and steward. All right. So I mentioned the Land Conservancy part of Tall Timbers was created in 1991. Some of those large property owners were trying to figure out how to ensure long-term conservation, and they were already starting to enter into conservation easements with other organizations, Nature Conservancy and stuff and such, and they saw a need and kind of wanted a local partner, and so that's when Tall Timbers started the Land Conservancy. And since '91, we've completed about 190 conservation easements with 139 landowners. Some of them have more than one conservation easement on their property. And that totals about 160,000 acres, with 50,000 in Florida and 111,000 in Georgia. Almost all of the larger ones are donated conservation easements. And it was I knew that was going on. I worked for a state agency previously that would purchase conservation easements, but it really surprised me when I started working in Tall Timbers about 4 years ago that to donate a conservation easement, you actually have to pay. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. And the reason you have to pay is it is a land transaction. And with a land transaction, there's due diligence. So there's all this, there's a bunch of paperwork, if you will, that goes with it. There's lawyers, there's surveyors, there's biologists who have to prepare reports. And that can amount to $25,000, $35,000. So some of these a lot of these donated ones actually donated more than just the easement value. And we'll break down some of that in a minute. But this is the area we work in with conservation easements. It goes up to just east of Columbus, Georgia. We've got some easements scattered around the upper parts of Georgia. We've got quite a presence in the Albany area, but most of them are down here between Tallahassee and Thomasville. The darker colors on here are government-held lands, the forest, Tate's Hell, wildlife refuge, etc. And so one of the things that's of interest with this map is these boundaries over here on the east and west side. This is pretty much the Auxilla River Basin and the Apalachicola River watershed here. And that's kind of how far we go out in Florida. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure I'm not going too ahead. Okay, so what do we do? A lot of what we do is connecting with landowners. We got to figure out where you are and what your objectives are, and that takes a lot of relationship development. So we go out, we meet on the property, we work with people, we support land management efforts. You can see in this photo in the middle, providing extension work, mostly to our conservation easement holders when they were doing hurricane cleanup recently, trying to get these contractors in to clean up hurricane stuff. We help with longleaf planting. Wildlife extension work is a big deal for Tall Timbers, both quail, deer, turkeys, things like that. And we do assist with prescribed burning And, you know, just general, get with private landowners and figure out where they are about their lands. We don't have a one-size-fits-all approach. If you're familiar with this sign, so I want to talk about what is a conservation easement. A couple of neat things with this sign. The fourth word there is forever. It's forever protected. And then down at the bottom, it's private property. So I'll circle back to those things, but those are important concepts that we get on these signs. Everybody who enters into a conservation easement with tall timbers is given one of these signs. Some people want more of them. So what do you have with private property? You have a bundle of rights associated with your property. These are all, and there's more than this, but these are the typical things. You can build, you can subdivide, you can hunt and fish. You can mortgage it, harvest timber, transfer it, sell it, graze livestock, other things like that. Keep the public out, exclude others. So a conservation easement gets into this bundle of rights. We basically end up exercising the easement part there. It says you can grant easements. That's a legal right you have with your property. And there's basically two types of easements in the world. There's access easements to let somebody through your property to get to their property. But there's also conservation easements. And conservation easements will tend to limit some of those rights. So a couple of them that jumped out at me in this graphic is you usually are giving up your right to subdivide the property, and you're also giving up the right to mine or do surface mining or drilling for minerals on the property. There are other rights that are given up as part of this, and all those have values to them. So a conservation easement is a legal agreement. As I mentioned, the landowner's relinquishing some rights. It limits subdivision, new construction, and you have a management plan. The property stays in private ownership. It is still your private property, and a conservation easement runs with the land in perpetuity. And what is perpetuity? Forever. How long is forever? That's a long time, right? So we got to think way off in the future on forever. But the key point really is that each conservation is really unique. There are some minimum standards that have to be adhered to in all conservation easements, but it's a negotiation. As I said, we're meeting the property owner where they are and trying to figure out the best fit for their property. Some people don't trust their kids, so they want to put a lot of restrictions on the property, you know, and others may want to continue some timber operations or even farming. All of those things are available. Key also on this slide is there is no public access requirement. You're not required to allow public access on a conservation easement protected property, even if you've entered into that easement with a public entity. So easements involve another party in the management and ownership of your land, because now the easement holder, in this case would be Tall Timbers, we have a right to your property, and that is to ensure these things don't happen. We have what we call stewardship. Your property gets visited every year if you're in a conservation easement, just to make sure you're adhering to the requirements of that easement that you've and not exercising the rights you have relinquished. Easements have to be held by a land trust or a government entity, and in our instance, we are an accredited land trust. Accreditation by the Land Trust Association is a standard that we hold ourselves up to make sure we're following the best practices for being a land trust. So some of the benefits of conservation easements: we're keeping the land in private ownership. The management responsibilities remain with the landowner. That's why governments are really, especially in Florida, interested in a lot more easements these days than they are in buying land outright, is because buying and owning land outright is expensive to own that land and properly manage it. So keeping it in private ownership but achieving the conservation goals are something that's pretty desirable these days. They still support the rural economies with timber, agriculture, hunting, livestock, ecotourism, and there are potential tax benefits to the owners of conservation easements. So most of these larger tracts I was talking about between Thomasville and Tallahassee, they get a tax benefit when they're donating those easements. I'm no accountant, so I don't want to explain what that is, so don't ask me any questions about it. But talk to your accountant. They can be good benefits. There are many indirect public benefits, so these are also important. They're productive lands for food and fiber still. They protect surface water and aquifer recharge, a really important thing. I'll probably circle back on that a little bit later. Scenic qualities and aesthetics. You drive up Highway 19 or you drive up Highway 319 between here and Thomasville, and you go through some really beautiful landscapes. You see some really pretty areas. That open pine savanna is just such a, I mean, when I drive to work from Tallahassee every morning, and when I get north of Childs High School, it's like, you know, that feels a lot better right up here, you know, for the next 10 miles or so up to Highway 12. It really is a big thing to protect these scenic and aesthetic qualities. And then, of course, they conserve habitats for wildlife and plants. As I mentioned earlier, every one of these is a negotiation. They're adaptable to landowner needs. We tailor our assistance to each landowner, educate them, explain the different types of easements that are available to you, and then just basically do our best to work with you to understand what you're doing before you enter into an agreement, an easement. We also assist, as I mentioned earlier, with conservation funding applications, so to other entities, so Florida Forever, Rural and Family Lands, Natural Resources Conservation Service, et cetera. And I think one of the really important things about some of that, and a couple of things I'll mention in a minute, is that one of the things I really like about tall timbers is, for us, a conservation win is a conservation win. If a piece of land gets protected, whether it's by the state, us, another entity, we're good with that. We don't have to be the ones that get the press release. We will help you get into another program and step away once it's done, and you know, be happy that your land got conserved. We don't have to win on all these. It is a win when that land gets conserved, and that's really what we're after. Once again, conservation easements, rural working lands stay working. There are conservation easements by other entities, and this is one of those things about finding you the best fit for a conservation easement. If you're going with the state of Florida's Florida Forever program, they're not as much into working lands with that one. They want more pristine natural areas. And so timber harvesting may be more limited with that. Also, with some of the NRCS easements, some of your activities may be a little more limited. But tall timbers, the ones we enter into, are going to be working lands easements. You can have agriculture, you can have selected timber harvesting, you can continue to hunt the property. Those are all things that we feel are important to the heritage of this area. You are going to have some areas that'll be off limits. If you got an old stand of longleaf pine, there's going to be what's called a special natural area drawn in your easement documents that says, okay, you're not going to be clear cutting that, okay? Moving on to that, we are protecting some of the last remnants of the great longleaf pine forest that once dominated the southeastern coastal plain. And it's not all about the trees. There's also a lot of other plants that these communities protect. The longleaf pine forest and the other pine savannas that are not necessarily longleaf. I don't even know what that plant is, but they tell me it's important. Another thing to just keep in mind is there's a number of regional land trusts in this area. We coordinate with them very closely, and you can see they actually we cross over in each other's stomping grounds a little bit, and we don't have a problem with that. We hold hands with them. We figure out who the best person is to deal with that particular landowner, and figure out whose programs are going to work best. So these are regional ones. There are also other state and even national organizations that deal with conservation easements, the Nature Conservancy, Trust for Public Lands, things like that. And we will, if we see a property that just doesn't fit with us but would be good for one of those, we'll work with the others to try and get it in there. So how many people have heard of the Florida Wildlife Corridor? This is a thing that's gained a lot of steam in the past few years, and it's a really interesting concept. It was really kind of kicked off by some young folks from down around Central Florida who wanted to look into this concept of whether large animals could actually still move through the state, and which they can, but what do we have to do to keep that a possibility? And one of the really neat things about this that I think fit well into today's land buying environment and conservation efforts is that they recognize through that whole process that this Florida Wildlife Corridor cannot be done without private lands. It has to involve private lands. And when you start talking to the powers that be at that big tall building in downtown Tallahassee, that really resonated quite well with them because they don't want to buy more land. I worked in that for many years, and I mean, they will buy more here and there on real priority, but in general, if they can leave the land in private ownership, that seems to be a preference these days. So a lot of funds have been, of the state's funds, have now been pushed towards working on this corridor on the private lands aspect of it, of conserving lands and keeping them private. And so it can't happen. You can't purchase all that land, but you can definitely get it under protection. So another one of our complicated maps. I apologize, but we like to tell stories with maps, and the story that this map is telling, I don't know how well it's showing up from the back of the room, but the pink on here is the conservation, the wildlife corridor lands that have been identified through these. And backing up, so this map was developed through a lot of mapping efforts, prioritization efforts, things like Jenny was talking about earlier today, where these folks look at where the best resources are, and then also how they could be linked together to move wildlife up and down the state. So that's how that mapping effort kind of happened. And then this one shows the pink lands being those zoomed in to our area. And you can see we already have, we conservation already have some really good footholds in the wildlife corridor. The Water Management District has lands along the rivers. We got Osceola Wildlife Management Area there on the Wasissa. This is Osceola lands here, some chunks, but there's holes, and that's the important thing, is how do we fill in these gaps? And we're working pretty closely with the wildlife corridor to try to focus some of our efforts on that gap filling exercise. And while we'll talk to people anywhere, you basically get bonus points if you're in the wildlife corridor, because it's really a good effort to kind of latch on to try to tie all these lands together. You can see there's been some really good progress, but there's more to be done for sure. All right, I'm going to shift gears a little bit into the Regional Conservation Partnership Program that Tall Timbers got involved with about 5 years ago. We started applying, and we're awarded a project under this. This is a program of the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is part of the Department of Agriculture. Natural Resources Conservation Service is the old Soil Conservation Service, which was formed after the Dust Bowl to try to keep dirt on the land and figure out good ways to do that and to do better conservation practices on agricultural and forestry lands. So in 2019, there was an application submitted by Tall Timbers before I worked there, and the 1.0, if you will, of our RCPP efforts was called Red Hills to the Coast, and it took in the St. Marks and McCullough River watershed and the Osceola River watershed. starting up around Thomasville and coming all the way to the coast. And that was our interest area there where we would be working on that program. The program has a 2021 to 26 timeline, total funding of around $7.1 million. 2.1 of that went directly to landowners for land management efforts. 3.5 is going to conservation easement purchases, and then the other 1.5 is to pay for, you know, my new truck or whatever over at Tall Timbers. keep us in salary over there. So during the last 4 years, we have expended all of the land management money through that program, the $2.1 million, on 114 contracts. What did I do? Hold on. High tech here. Okay, 114 contracts, and in those contracts, we were able to get 113,000 acres of prescribed fire contracted on these properties, planted over 500,000 pine trees on 820 acres, about 463,000 were longleaf pine. We have a great focus on longleaf. 2,000 acres of forest stand improvement, and treated about 900 acres of invasive, exotic, and non-native plants. There's 3 RCPP conservation easements have closed, all 3 in Madison County, and we're working on about 7 more that should be done within about a year and a half. We're actually going to extend that past the 2026 timeline. So good successes in that small area. One of the things we learned with that is that watershed boundaries aren't really your friend when you're doing this type of work. So we learned a lesson there. We learned a lot of lessons. That was our first foray into that federal program, and it's been very interesting. So Tall Timbers 2.0, last fall we applied for a new program for $25 million to run from 2025 to 2029. Part of it is to support outreach events. We're at one right now. We support events like this one, but we assist private landowners by providing technical assistance for land management, for better forest health. Our big key practices we're working on is prescribed fire, longleaf pine establishment and restoration and management, brush and weed management, usually to help you get a property back into prescribed burning, forest stand improvement, often for the same reason, and then purchasing conservation easements from willing landowners. The new program has 11 counties only in Florida. We're not working in Georgia with this program. We've got some other things we're going to work in Georgia with, and we will in the future. But this one got awarded and finally executed just a month or so ago to work in these 11 counties in Florida. And we just yesterday closed our first application period for the land management efforts here. As I mentioned, in the previous one, we had about 114 contracts over 4 years. We got 120, I think, applications. So this is getting big. We kind of feel like the dog that caught the garbage truck, and we're going to have to figure out how to deal with a whole lot more clients every year. But it's exciting times. So the program, it's getting kind of redundant here. Plant and manage longleaf pines, reintroduction and implementation of prescribed fire. I want to get back to that in a minute.
We're past almost 35 minutes.
Okay, I just have a few more. So the way it starts is with property visit. You see our advertising there that's been on Facebook if you have it. This is basically a lot of what we work with. This is the exact same photo station. Your typical, I'm not a scientist, so I get to create my own habitats. I call that North Florida jungle. And that's what happens if you don't burn around here or maintain your land. So in the exact same location, you see these trees are the same. That's what we got going on. That's a prescribed fire being burned across it. It's first prescribed fire in about 15 years. We help people with their projects if they need it. Some folks who are new to land management need help figuring out how to do this. And so we've actually Planted trees. We try not to do that very often. That's not fun work. But we help with prescribed burning. That's a tie jungle that shouldn't be there. And somebody putting the smack down on that tie, one of our employees. That's the best. That's how I really like tie to look on fire. So we can assist as needed. A lot of folks are able to do their own stuff, or they have a forestry company under contract or something like that. Two last things. We got into oyster restoration as part of this because NRCS has practices. So we work with Tallahassee State College, where they installed a number of oyster domes in the bay off of Spring Creek. Here's another picture of that. And then the one thing I'll close with is that we're going to be working next year with the aquaculture, the oyster growers. They are farmers just like farmers up here on the hill, and there are conservation practices they can implement as part of their work there, and so we'll be working with them in the future through this program. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Tyler. We do have time for a question.